Hi, my name is Hotcake. I play League of Legends, and I've been seeing on the forums and everything how Riot released what's called a matchmaking article, where they essentially announced that they're going to change their matchmaking system for 2019. Now, before this, they actually had a set of three different articles, all talking about matchmaking and supposedly how it works and what they were doing since 2016. And now they have a fourth article dealing with matchmaking where they actually talk about the new matchmaking system. I don't normally make videos like this, but a lot of the videos that I saw about a lot of different people talking about it, I felt like they missed a lot of the things that Riot was trying to convey to people, and they also misunderstood a few things on the actual forum itself, on the actual article. And so I wanted to go ahead and go over a few of those points and to essentially give my opinion on this article so that other people can sort of see it and sort of understand, at least from my perspective, what I'm seeing about all this. And I just, when I read the article, I can tell that Riot was trying to convey a few things, but there's a lot of YouTubers that they also make opinions on this stuff, and I think they miss a lot of these points because one of the biggest problems that I see, and it's very consistent actually throughout a lot of different YouTube channels, is that a lot of people seem to have the habit of trying to create a solution to a problem without identifying what causes the problem in the first place. So it I used to tutor math many years ago. I used to tutor it a lot, and I can tell you that one of the biggest problems why a lot of people could not solve certain problems is because they didn't know what was causing those problems in the first place, the fundamental cause. And so I felt like a lot of people didn't identify that correctly in many of these YouTube videos that I was watching, where people were talking about the new matchmaking system. So I wanted to go ahead and go over this, at least to give again my perspective on this. One thing about me, however, that you must note is that I tend to, when I analyze things, especially when it comes to ranked or any kind of competitive gaming, is I always try to place myself in the perspective of other people and other players, how they think, what they're going through, and what they're going to think when they see this, and how they feel when they see this. So before I do any of that analysis, I'm always looking at the people and trying to understand the people first before I actually make these decisions. And I actually also consult with my cousin because my cousin plays League too, and I consult on him a lot of things because he actually played League a couple years before I came in. I came in at the end of season 5, and he came in around season 3, I believe. So he remembers a lot more than I do. And anytime there's something going on, or something in the game changes, or people are complaining about something, a lot of times I go to him and I consult him and ask him what he thinks. And so I get a lot of insight from him. So I think the first thing Riot was talking about was ranking up, where they say we knew we didn't want to make substantial changes to ranked and then just announce a new system right before. So that's good on their behalf. They're getting this stuff early so that they can get it right and get a lot of feedback. I think that's a very wise decision. They said instead we're sharing our plans early so you can help us shape ranked, and we'll be updating you regularly throughout development. So this process is going to involve the entire community of League of Legends, which is something I don't think they've done this before. Working through the problems above, we focus on 4 key things that ranked should do. Give clear feedback, diverse set of challenges, regular milestones, meaningful goals, regardless of skill level, and then reward deep and ongoing investment. So these are the 4 things that Riot is most concerned about when they're talking about ranked. And they know ranked right now is a mess. So the thing about ranked is before, I believe it was in season 5 where everything was fine. Season 5 did not have role select, and I'll talk about role select in a little bit. But season 5 did not have role select. And season 6 was actually the season where dynamic queue came in for the first time. And when dynamic queue came in, where people could group as 4 or even 5 people and ranked in that manner, it really made people upset because it imbalanced the rank matches a lot. And a lot of people actually consider season 6 as one of the worst seasons for ranked because of dynamic queue. It was so bad, and people were complaining about it so much that they essentially just got rid of dynamic queue for season 7. And so things supposedly went back to normal. But because of the damage that the dynamic queue caused, a lot of more people started focusing on matchmaking in general for anything that could be imbalanced for whatever reason. So season 7 made everybody very, I would say, high on alert on the matchmaking itself. And so throughout season 7, we had a lot of people just complaining, putting stuff in the forums, talking about matchmaking, how imbalanced it was, just all across the board. And Riot was getting frustrated by this, but there was another thing that was happening at the same time too, and that was Fortnite. So Fortnite at the time, actually last year, Fortnite, they introduced the Battle Royale mode. Even though Fortnite has been around since 2011, they never had the Battle Royale mode in the whole history until just last year. So when they introduced it last year, it quickly gained a lot of popularity. Now, a lot of people think that there's a lot of players that are going to Fortnite from League. That's most of the older players. It's true that League is losing quite a few players to Fortnite, but Fortnite is pretty much gaining players from pretty much every other game. So that's not really the problem. The problem that Riot has is that they're also intaking a lot of the incoming generation of gamers. And so Riot is looking at that and saying, well, how do we get these gamers instead? Because it's one thing to talk about League dying in terms of a lot of players leaving the game, but it's a completely different story when you talk about the gamers that are incoming into the game, the newer generation. And so what happens is the older generation leaves the game, you got a newer generation that comes in and increases those base numbers, and then that changes the community entirely. So the community is constantly changing because of that. I don't think a lot of people talk about that, the incoming generations into the games, but that's something that should be considered. But I digress. So Fortnite was essentially it was getting very, very popular, very popular. And so Riot started looking at this and saying, well, we're kind of decreasing in player numbers a little bit, but they're increasing in player numbers. How do we fix this? How do we fix the problem that is matchmaking currently, where a lot of people are complaining about it? We know it's not a very good system right now. So what can we do? And that's when they came up with these articles and they started talking about it. And so that's essentially what we're at now, is we're trying to figure out how can we fix the matchmaking system. So one of the first things that they talk about is they talk about a provisional rank, where you get a rank after the first game. You can't have one before the first game. So after the first game, you get a provisional rank that will essentially tell you the lowest rank you can have. I'm not quite sure what effect this will have. I know some people say it might make people anxious, where they might not like that rank. I think there might be an effect to where people will act as if that is their current rank, and they'll probably freak out because it's very low. But this obviously won't affect the lower ranked people, like people that are in bronze, because theirs is almost always going to come up as bronze 5, and then they'll be like, well, it's going to be bronze 5 no matter what. So the people at the lowest ends of the ladder will be completely unaffected by this. It's the people that are higher in the ladder. So I'm not really quite sure what to make out of this. We'll just have to wait and see what exactly happens. But I think people will find out very quickly that at least some of the times, whatever that provisional rank after the first game is pretty much the rank you're going to get once you finish your series. I think people will find that out very quickly. It says LP games will be accelerated. They're always accelerated in the first 10 games. And then it says you'll skip promotion series and you'll be shielded from losing LP. Okay, so this is going to tie into something I'm going to talk about in a little bit, which is it's basically the 2 tiers. And it says, over the years, we've seen position select. We've seen a decrease in the variety of champions and positions player picked and ranked. So right here, what they're essentially saying is they're talking about position select and how they want to make it so that you can now choose the positions later and you'll have a separate rank for each one, rather than have one rank for the overall thing. So this is something I wanted to talk about because I think a lot of people missed a certain mark in this, which is autofill. This quickly gets into discussion of autofill. So a lot of YouTubers that I saw talk about the position select right now and how Riot recognizes that their biggest problem right now is specialization, which is where you have certain people, they go in and they only play one role and a few champions and that's it, and they're able to rank up very quickly. Well, that is a problem because once they get into the other roles, their off-role positions, so to speak, they're no longer as competent. And so you end up losing games because they're not as good as if they were in their main role in the first place. So specialization is something that Riot is really, I would say, in a war against right now. And they really kind of hate it. But a lot of people missed a certain premise about this. A lot of people complain about autofill. They think autofill is causing this problem, and they say that, autofill, well, you got people, they get in their off roles and it's filling them. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Autofill is not the problem. If anything, autofill has been there since the inception of the game. It's existed since League first came in. It's existed since the time of MOBAs. And the reason autofill has existed is because you always have those roles like support that nobody wants to play, or that very few people will actually be willing to queue up in. So the problem is not autofill. If anything, autofill helps out uh, with the specialization problem, because it forces other people to play off roles instead, and to try to win games that way. Well, the problem is role select. Role select is the problem because before role select came in, I remember very well, in season 5, in season 6, role select was introduced, but before that, there was no role select. So seasons 0 to 5, there was no role select. And so the way it worked was people would go into a lobby. It was just regular matchmaking, and people would fight for the positions that they wanted. So usually the first person to declare a position as soon as they get into a lobby would be the guy to get that role. If 3 people called for mid, the one who called it first would get it. That's just an example. And so you would get a massive number of problems with this, because you get several people that want to play a certain position, and then most of the time nobody wanted to play support. So people were forced into different roles constantly because of this. But what role select essentially did was it allowed people to queue for certain positions and have a guaranteed to get whatever role they wanted. So if a person was really good at mid, it wasn't the case where they had to fight for mid every single time they got in, and then they would get mid a few times. It was now the case that in role select, you could get mid every single time, and you can get so many times in a row. In fact, it's so bad that, especially with people like me who have now found out that once you queue for a game, if your estimated timer, you have an estimated timer and you have an actual queue time. As long as your actual queue timer does not go far past your estimated time, you will never get autofilled. So every time I go in and I queue up, if it passes the estimated time, I just restart the queue, and I never get autofilled that way. Now, the only downside of that is it will take me longer to get into a game, but it will make sure I get the role I want. So that essentially lets me play any role I want so many games in a row, all day if I wanted to. And that's what allowed people to specialize in these roles. So that's the problem right now, is we have people that are able to play the roles they want too many times in a row. And so they even say right here, we've seen a decrease in the Riot champions and positions players picked in rank. So Riot understands this problem, but a lot of people think autofill is the problem, and it's not. Yeah, we realize the system pushes players to specialize. Rank doesn't recognize players who master several positions. In fact, if you've ever queued up for another position or gotten autofilled, you probably realize our matchmaking system treats your skill the same regardless of what you're playing. So this gets back to the problem, which is we no longer have a case in the game where the strongest person in the game can win you the game. We now have the case where the most autofilled person is most likely the one to lose you the game. The worse you are in opposition, the more likely you are to find yourself in a really hard game. And then they say matchmaking should be as fair as possible. This is where they get into positional matchmaking, fancy way of saying. So the thing about positional matchmaking is I'm not sure if this will fix the problem, because if you're going to have a rank for each position, then most likely what will happen is people will only care about one role. So who cares if you have bronze in 4 roles? If you have diamond in 1 role, that's all people are going to care about. So if I have mid, for say, if I love mid, and that's the only role I care about, who cares what I get in the other roles? If I have mid and I have it at diamond and I can get the challenger that way, then by gosh, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to care what my other roles are. If I go and I brag to other people about it, and then they'll say, even if there is a one rank that fits all, like an overall rank that averages all your ranks all together, it wouldn't matter, because the only thing that the player would brag about is that one diamond rank or challenger rank or whatever rank in that one position. That's the only thing they'll brag about. They're not going to care about the other positions. And this also confuses me, because Riot also said, they said it somewhere in this post, I can't remember where, that once you get to master, they would get rid of all the position ranks and then give you that one rank for master and challenger, because this whole system that they're creating is not effective, and it's not essentially not going to work at the highest tier of the rank ladder. So that kind of confuses me a little bit, because I don't understand if that would work. I don't know if you have to get all 5 roles into master for that to trigger, or if you only need 1. And I certainly don't know how that would work if you get demoted from master. Would it split back into, like, which which role would get the highest rank. So I'm not quite sure how that would work. I'm really confused by that. But we will see what they have. Um, yeah, so the thing about it is they're trying to incentivize people and bribe them by essentially saying, look, if you get no off roll, we'll try to make it as fair as possible for you. We'll try to compensate for you by putting you in a lower level MMR level game so that you don't feel as pressured and you don't feel as bad about it. And if you win that game, we'll give you a bonus. That's not going to really mean anything if they're not going to be comfortable in that role. Because what happens is when people get autofilled, they don't really care about getting more of it. They just care about winning the game. So if they don't get anything that helps them win the game, which actually it does a little bit, but they're not going to feel it, then they're not really going to care about it. So actually, if anything, this positional matchmaking, I feel like it's actually going to make it worse. Because one of the biggest problems we have right now is people just simply don't care about games where they don't get their roles. And I think this would make it worse because if you're queuing up for one role and you get autofill into another one, then you're really not going to care if you win that one because who cares if that rank goes down? You want the other rank to go up, and that's the only thing you're going to care about. So actually, I think it would make it worse. One more, it says competitive intent is a big deal in rank, and that's actually what I was just talking about, which is people are just not taking the game seriously. People don't get the roles. They throw a tantrum. They don't get the champions they want. They throw tantrums. People ban the champions that they want to play. They throw a tantrum. So players have gotten really, really spoiled lately within the past few years, and that's kind of a problem. But at the same time, the system is what incentivizes that in the first place. We're solving a number of other edge cases like these, including position swapping. So position swapping, that's even more of a reason position swap. Again, people want certain roles, and they will find ways to exploit the system to get it. But like I said, I was conversing with my cousin on this a lot, and he feels that the only way you're going to fix this problem is to get rid of role selection completely and go back to the system that it used to be, which is where people would fight for these roles instead of having the system selected for you. And he wants it like that because he doesn't want it to where people can get the same role over and over again, because that's what causes the specialization in the first place. And so one other thing about specialization is the reason Riot has such a huge problem with specialization is because what it has essentially done is when you have people playing either one role or a tiny champion pool where they only care about those one's champions, what essentially it does is it bubbles these people up to the top of the ladder. And so in the challenger level, you essentially get a bunch of one-trick ponies. You get a lot of people that only play one role. Most of the challenger ladder, if you haven't looked at it lately, most of these players in the challenger ladder, they specialize in only one role or one champion or several champions, but it's very little. And so because these players bubble up to the top, it pushes all the other players down that have a general base knowledge of the game. And so this bubbling has it's made it much more diverse than the challenger ladder, but it hasn't really made those players that know more about the game shine. So this has actually created a reverse situation where in the past, it used to be that if you wanted to know more about the balance of the game, the state of the game, what's broken, what's not, you would go to the challenger players because they had the most knowledge about the game than anybody else. And so you would ask them what's going on with the game. But now that these one-trick players and all these players that I would say are pretty much biased because they only specialize in a very small portion, a small scope of the entire game, the situation has reversed to where now you have to go to the diamond players and ask for that type of information because the challenger players will have nothing but one-trick ponies and stuff like that in there. So that's a really big problem that Riot has been facing. That's why they don't like specialization in the first place. They also talk about milestones and goals. When we looked at our current arrangement of ranks, we found some of our tiers encompass a wide skill range or have too many players. This results in situations where some players go a long time without ever ranking up. We could solve this problem by shuffling players around within our current tiers, but we'd end up pushing them into the higher ranks. Instead, we thought this would be a good opportunity to add more thresholds where players can get positive feedback. All right, so basically what they're saying that the current design adds 2 new tiers, and the addition of these tiers will help achieve 2 things. First, they'll help smooth us out the bad experiences in the bronze, silver, and diamond. Second, they'll bring more differentiation for diamond players, which is something that has been a problem for a while. This essentially does nothing. The thing about the tiers is What's causing the problem with the tiers is this. So what happens is when you have a ranked system, you're going to have a situation where you have a lot of players at the bottom. And so what essentially happens is you have all these players at the way bottom of what's essentially called a pyramid. And so as you go higher in the ranks, the number of players thins out, and it gets thinner and thinner until you get to the top, which in this case is Challenger, and it gets really thin to where you have a very tiny portion of the player base there. And so this it's supposed to be a smooth pyramid scheme up like this on the ranked ladder. But we don't have that right now. What happens right now is as you look at the pyramid, at each tier, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and diamond, you have a situation where it's extremely uneven at each division. So it will be fat, I like to say fat, in some areas and very thin in other areas. And what I mean by fat is there's a lot more players in certain divisions than others. And I actually looked at the rank ladder the other day, and I noticed that the fattest regions on the ladder are in the divisions of 5. So silver 5, gold 5, plat 5, diamond 5 are the fattest regions. And so as you go up in each tier, it will essentially do this, and then it will thin out in a really thin region around the first and second divisions in each tier. And then as soon as you hit the next tier, it sort of bulges out a little bit again. And so you get this uneven pyramid going all the way up. The only exception is bronze. Bronze is actually a little bit reversed until you get to the last tier, which I'm actually not quite sure why that is. I don't know why bronze is reversed, but the tier at the way bottom is kind of fat. But the thickest region in the entire ladder is silver 5. There are more players in silver 5 than any other division in the entire ladder. And so Riot does not like this because this extreme unevenness where you have a very wobbly and very uneven pyramid at the top means that there are certain divisions that are extremely or much more difficult to get out of than other regions. One of the biggest examples I like to give is silver. So in silver 5, you have this very thick region of players. And as you go up, as soon as you get to silver 2, it just whoosh, thins out a lot, actually. It's actually a dramatic drop in the player base. And then in silver 2 and silver 1, it drops a lot more. And then in gold 5, it bulges out a lot. So in silver 2 and 1, this is why silver 2 is so difficult to get out of, is because the player base is so thin that most of the time the matchmaking is forced to look into either silver 3 and 4 or gold 5 and silver 1 to try to look for players in there. And that's a massive difference in MMR skill when you try to make a game in that point. That's why silver 2 is so hard to get out of. And there's other regions where it's the same case. Gold, I think the gold tier when I looked at it was not as bad. So it didn't have dramatic drops like silver and plat did. And diamond is actually a lot worse. But in gold, that's why gold is pretty easy to get out of because the player base doesn't thin out as dramatically as the other tiers. So some of these divisions are much, much harder to get out of than others just because of the player base numbers in that division. But the reason this happens is not because of the number of tiers there are. The reason this happens is because of the promotion series and the shielding that goes on. So instead of having players rising up when they're supposed to be at a higher level and going down when they're supposed to be at a lower level, they get shielded from all of this. And so they stay stuck essentially in one spot. And that's what creates the fatty areas, especially around the Division 5s. I remember a long time ago when I was in Silver 5, I was at 0 LP. I lost about, I would say 5, 6, almost 10 games in a row, and it did not knock me down to Bronze 1. I should have been Bronze 2, almost Bronze 3 at that point. But I stayed stuck in Silver 5 because of the shielding. So what this essentially does is it gets players stuck at these divisions, and it's why you get all these fatty areas, because all these players that are supposed to go downward and assist with all these thin areas to smooth it out, they don't go down there at all because the shielding doesn't let them. So they just stay stuck in this area. And it creates these thin regions where all of a sudden, all the players that are supposed to be in these regions, it just like this, because all the players go one way or another. And so that's what happens currently in this system. So adding 2 new tiers doesn't do anything. It just shifts around all the fatty areas until you actually get rid of the shielding and you actually get rid of the promotion series altogether. You're never going to have a smooth pyramid like this. And so that's what Riot's looking at. And also, adding 2 new tiers, they said that they found an opportunity to reduce the number of divisions from 5 to 4. That actually still makes it harder because the way it is currently, we have 5 tiers and 5 divisions in each tier. So that's 25 divisions altogether. if you go to this new system that they want, which is 2 new tiers, 1 less division, you'd actually get 28 divisions. So it actually makes it harder to rank up, and you'll still have the thin regions because of the shielding in each tier. So that's my take on this, which is that the only way you're going to thin it out is if you get rid of the shielding or if you decrease the amount of shielding. I think losing 10 games in a row is kind of ridiculous. Now that I think about it, and I couldn't go to bronze even though I lost that many games. But that was a long time ago. So deep and ongoing investment. So rank rewards could be more aspirational. They said they're going to divide the season into 3 splits. I don't really care about this. I guess it would help because people get anxious. They want things right away. I think people would eventually, like after this goes into effect, they'll probably say, oh, we should get one every month. And then even if Riot does that, they'll say, oh, we should have one every 2 weeks. People will always want things quicker. So maybe this will work. I don't really see the significance in that. It doesn't really matter to me anyway. But they can do whatever they want. I have nothing to say about it other than that. Rank border, same thing. Evolve rewards. And then one thing I wanted to know about all this is that this article and the other articles dealing with matchmaking, they were all written by a guy named he's Riot Matchmaking. His real name is Ed Altorfer, and he's basically the lead designer in the Riot company. So all the changes, all the patch notes, everything has to go through him. He has to coordinate all of it. And actually, I took a look at Ed Altorfer. That's his name. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I might not. And I saw him on Twitter, and I was actually kind of shocked. The last time I saw him on Twitter, he only had about 500 followers. So a lot of people actually don't know about him, but he is a tank main, and he loves Maokai a lot. In fact, if you read this article that I'm looking at, which is the 2019 rank changes, he mentions Maokai a lot, and he actually brags about it a little bit. He'll say something like, Maokai's good everywhere, or something like that. So that's something that people should keep in mind. Which actually, I have a fan here, so it's blowing my hair a lot. I have to keep adjusting it a little bit, but it's actually kind of hot in here and stuffy. But that's okay. But yeah, Riot Matchmaking is the guy that wrote all this, and he makes a lot of the patch notes. I think it's very important that people understand that he is a tank main. He loves tanks. So that's probably why there was a tank meta in the first place. But I'm just looking over this, trying to. I know there was something else I was going to say, and I completely forgot. Yeah, I don't remember. There was something else I was going to say, and I completely forgot. But yeah, if you want help, I'll write Sad Magic a little bit, because he kind of needs the help a little bit. Not a lot of people know about him, but he is a very important person in Riot. He makes a lot of these decisions and changes and stuff like that. So yeah, so again, with all the balance and all the balancing in the game going on and everything, I just wanted to go ahead and get my opinion in, because I felt like there's a lot of things that people weren't talking about. Oh yes, I remember now, which is the MMR system. I was going to talk about the MMR system. So the MMR system, a lot of people don't understand it too well. Riot, of course, is not going to tell us exactly what system they're using. I think there was a rumor years back that the matchmaking system that they were using is called the True MMR system, and that's I don't remember how it worked too well, because it was very, very specific and detailed, and it gets into all these computer science technicalities and stuff. But essentially, the MMR works in a very simple manner, which is you get 10 people in a room, and you try to organize teams of 5 so that the MMR averages of both teams are essentially either the same or it's very close to each other. And as long as you have this criteria where the team's MMRs are very close to each other, then it's considered balanced. So it doesn't matter. At that point, it doesn't matter what the MMRs of each individual player is. As long as the team's average MMRs are about the same, then it should be fine. It should be balanced. But the problem with this is that that type of system cannot look at individual MMRs, and it doesn't really take into account much the deviation of it. So I actually joked a while back, which is like you can take 5 people with 1200 MMR each. And then you can take 5 other people, one with like 2400, and then a bunch of other ones with like 600 or something like that. I don't remember the numbers too well. And that would be considered balance. So you essentially have a challenger player with bronze against 5 silvers. But the system can't really look at that and say this is not balanced. It just looks at the average MMRs and then says it's balanced. So that's I don't know if the system currently does that. I know it used to do that, but they've made so many changes to the system that they can't really tell us if they did. But that's how I feel about it. The other thing about matchmaking that is not talked about a lot is something I like to call variance. It's a statistical term which has to do with data. So what variance basically is in technical terms, or strict definition, is it's how far players deviate from the norm or the average. So say you get 10 people and you find out the average MMR of all these players put together is. Let's say the average MMR is 1500. So we get players that are 1500. If you have a variance of 10, then that means that every player's MMR deviates by that 1500 mark by no more than 10. So you might look at a player be like 1492, you'll see one player 1501, you'll see 1510, you'll see 1490, all these numbers that jump around 1500. But you'll never see a player that's above 1510, and you'll never see a player below 1490 because the variance is only 10. Now, if you have a variance of 100, then that means you're really going to get players all over the place. You'll get a 1600, you'll get a 1400, you'll get a 1520, you'll get a 1487. All these numbers jump around. And so the bigger the variance is in general, the more imbalanced the matches are going to be. And I think that when Role Select first came out, there was no autofill. And Riot basically had a problem essentially where the queue times were just very, very high at the time. Even if you were in the low tiers like bronze or silver, you could wait up to half an hour just to play one game. And that was common back then. And the highest tiers, Challenger and Master, it was not unheard of for people to be waiting hours just to get into a single game. So that's the reason, and actually autofill was introduced in secret because autofill first came out with the higher tier players, where the higher tier players started noticing that they were getting filled into positions, particularly support. And they started complaining about it in forums and everything. And so Riot's secret was out, and the only thing they did to fix it was they officially introduced it later as autofill for the game. And so a lot of people understood that because of the introduction of autofill, that fixed the queue times a lot, and the queue times are lower. But Riot did something else that a lot of people did not pay attention to, which was they changed the algorithm of matchmaking. They actually changed it several times. And they increased the variance of matchmaking so that it was broader. So if you were silver 3 per se, rather than the system looking for only silver players to queue with, it would look for bronze and golds as well in order to try to balance the game out more. I think recently the variance has sort of shortened or gotten smaller a little bit because I feel like matchmaking has gotten a lot more balanced. And I don't see a lot of people in bronze and golds in my game anymore. But it was really getting noticeable, I believe, at the end of last year when you had a lot of challenger players saying, hey, I got bronze in my team, I got unranked players. There would be plots with bronze, all kinds of just weird, crazy combinations. So they increased their variance and didn't tell anybody about it. But if you just look at the data, you'll notice it. That's essentially what happened. So Riot is a little bit scared of decreasing the variance because that essentially increases the queue times. And this goes back to what Skara had said at one time, and Skara was actually talking about dynamic queue one day, where he said, typically you'll have 3 things you'll have to compromise one, which is the queue times, the role select, and the balance of the games. And so because the queue times was compromised at the time, they tried to fix this problem, but then they ended up compromising another thing, which is the balance of the matches. So it's a very thin line, very fine line to have to cross to do that. But that's essentially what happened. Not a lot of people talk about, but that is essentially what happened. What also changes, and there's another factor that affects matchmaking in a game, and this is something that is completely out of Riot's control, which is when people are playing the game. So if you notice that at certain times of the day, the games will feel more balanced than others, a lot of times that's true. And the reason is because there's more people playing in certain times of the day than others. I think in the mornings, I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it was in the mornings. More people play than any other time of the day, which is why mornings are oftentimes better to play in than, say, evenings or even at nights. Um, that's something that's completely out of Riot's control. Riot cannot do anything about that because they can't control when people come in to play the game. They can't force people to play the game at certain times. They can try to incentivize it, but I wouldn't even recommend it. But that's another thing that does affect matchmaking is when you have less people playing the game, the matches are going to be a lot more imbalanced than if there is a lot of people. So you want to play at times and in places where there's a lot more people playing the game because your matches will be a lot more balanced than before. So going back to the positional matchmaking, anytime there's something that sounds good or something that seems like it'll work and it will solve the problem, a lot of time there's a lot of unintended side effects. So I'm always worried about that. I'm mostly a skeptic when it comes to things like that. But you always have to be aware of unintended side effects, and that's a lot of people just will not talk about. I understand a lot of people are going, oh, it's going to be great, it's going to be the best thing, but you need to understand the fundamental causes of what causes these problems first. And I think a lot of them were not. They weren't. Some of them weren't. Some of them were doing it. Others were not. And I was getting a little bit frustrated by that. But who am I? Who am I to say that? I'm not a challenger player, by the way. I used to be gold, and I'm silver now. So I'm not going to know more than the challenger and master players that talk about this. But I felt like I don't do videos like this, guys, normally. I just don't. Because normally they get things right and they're right about it. But this is some case that I felt like they were a little bit off. They weren't wrong. They were just a little bit off on these things. So I just wanted to put my opinion in there just to talk about things that other people weren't talking about. And I think that's it. I think that's all I have to say about it. If I can remember anything else, I'll put some more videos on it later. But for now, I'm actually gonna have to cut this video off because I'm going really long. So please leave comments in the video below. I'd love to hear from other people. I am not someone who sits here and says I am right about everything because obviously I'm not. Sometimes I can get things wrong, and I'm just a human being, so I'm not perfect. So if there's anything that you guys feel like you disagree with or you think I'm a little bit off, go ahead and leave a comment. Let's have a discussion. I have no problem with that, and I'll admit if I'm wrong on anything. So I'm a big fan of open discussion and learning more things. But until then, until the next video, I guess I'll see you guys then. So, peace.